The name's Bond. James Bond. The name's Bond. James Bond.
Welcome amigos to another tutorial, and I'm super excited about this one because we'll be exploring the Power Mesh feature in Mocha Pro. I've been using it for the last couple of weeks. It's amazing. You can use it to do better rotoscoping, quicker and faster rotoscoping, jersey swaps, that'll be a future tutorial, and this one, which is face swap. Now, this feature is only available in the professional version of Mocha. If you want to take that leap and go to the professional, check out the description. There's a code courtesy of Boris Effects. All that info is in the description. And if you want to master the fundamentals of After Effects, go to aemastercourse.com. That is the course that I developed based on my experience to get you up and running, rock solid foundation in After Effects. And remember that life is truly a gift. Make it count. Let's get started with this face swap. Control I or Command I to import your footage. This is a clip that I shot of myself saying that my name is Bond, James Bond, and by the end of it, I thought I was James Bond. And this clip is a clip that I downloaded from YouTube. Now, you got to make sure that the clip that you shoot and the original clip is the same frame rate, 23.976. You can see 23.976. That's critical. And the second thing is the same resolution as original. Now you can shoot this one, the one that you shoot of yourself or the talent could be 4K or 2K, but you'll need to pre-comp it down to 1920 by 1080 or whatever the size of your footage. Let's drag this footage into the comp icon. And let's move the current time indicator all the way right here. And let's set the in point. Let's splice this layer. Control Shift D. I'll delete this one. Let's rename this to Bond. And what I'll do is I'll add a marker, hit the asterisk, double click, start, and let's select green. Now the reason that I'm doing this and I'm not trimming the comp right here or moving it to the beginning is because when I was using this Power Mesh and I was pasting all that tracking data back and I had done that, I had trimmed the comp or moved it, there was some type of misalignment. It wasn't aligning properly. So if you stick to this method, it'll work perfectly. So just leave it at the very end. We can just trim the comp to our work area. Let's go to the end right here, and remember to subscribe and press the bell icon. Okay, I'm gonna trim the out point and we're ready to go into Mocha. Make sure that is selected, Effect, Mocha Pro, click on the button. And this Power Mesh feature is available only in Mocha Pro, not Mocha AE, but it's a good reason to upgrade because it's awesome, it's amazing. Now there's two keyboard shortcuts, the letter Z to zoom in and zoom out, and X for the hand tool to move. And these are two keyboard shortcuts, commit them to memory, very handy. When you're doing the face swap, we want to subtract the area of the eyes and the mouth so we can show the natural movement of the talent. So that's what we'll do first before we track the face. So go to the circle tool, let's draw an oval. I'm gonna rotate, Control A for all the points, and let's move it. Let's call this eye, and this is actually the right eye of Bond. Go back to the circle, and let's draw another oval. Control A, and let's move this. And this is eye, LT. Okay, let's go down to track, and we only want the top three. Deselect shear. Same thing for RT. And you can see that the current time indicator is here, and we should have done it at the very beginning, but that's okay. You'll see that we can track backwards, and we're tracking both at the same time. Usually I would track one at a time, but this is something that I've done several times, and I know it'll work. For something simple like this, you can track both at the same time. Once you're done tracking, we want to lock that tracking data. So what we need to do is click on this gear icon and it'll lock it. Basically, it'll turn off the tracking because it's already done. Move the CTI to the beginning And let's go back to the circle. Let's make it pretty big. Rotate it, Control A to move the points. And now we can move the individual points. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and click the lasso tool to select this point, these 3 points, move it up. And let's rename this layer to mouth. And let's take away, let's deselect shear, and let's track forward. I noticed that the track slipped, but it doesn't matter. This doesn't have to be perfect. What we can do is at the very end, we can just move this and it'll create keyframes for us. Now, again, let's lock that tracking data. We're done tracking. So click on the little gear. And the next step is to track the face. Now, there's 2 things you need to take into consideration. Number 1 is when you're defining the area that you want to track, that will, 1, be the area where you'll create the mesh, the power mesh. And number 2 is Mocha is a planar tracking software. So if you track a plane, it'll do the best job. Now, obviously the face is not exactly a flat plane. You have a nose, for example, that extrudes out, but we can get away to a certain extent. Now, there are some people that will go up to the hair and track the whole entire face. But from my experience, just trying this out for the last couple of weeks, just tracking that plane, the front part of the face, will pretty much give you really good results. So that's what we'll do. Let's go to the X spline tool and let's click to create these points. And Control A, and let's drag this blue handle to just curve this a little bit. And we can adjust these points. You can see that the current time indicator is right here. So I'm actually going to delete this, move this all the way to the beginning, Control A, and we can move this and we can modify these points. So take your time. Remember that the mesh will be inside this area as well, but we also want the best area to track to give us the best results. And let's call this face. Now these layers, I'm going to change the color for now to green and this one to blue. If I activate this button and I bring the face all the way down to the bottom, you'll see that now it's subtracting the eyes and the mouth. And that's really important. You need to make sure that your face track is a bottommost layer. If you had it on top, let's say right here, it's not going to subtract anything. So if we bring it all the way to the bottom, it'll subtract any layers that is above. Let's go down to track. If it starts drifting, you may want to increase this number minimum pixels used up to maybe 70, 80, or 90. We'll stick to 70 for now. If you have perspective movement, we would check perspective, but in this case, there isn't much. So what I'll do is just deselect it. And this new option is mesh. Now, when you click on mesh, automatically Mocha created this mesh for you. And we have these 2 sections. And for mode, we have automatic and uniform. And anytime you modify any of these properties, you need to hit the generate mesh button to update. So we have uniform and we have automatic. Now, in uniform, you can see that if I click on this button and this hides the mesh, you can see that the mesh is outside our spline, and that's because we have vertices on spline selected. If we deselect it, it'll be inside the mesh. We can make this smaller. Now, in my experience, I found that doing these face swaps automatic works really well. 32 is a good size to start out with if you're working in HD and 4K. So start out with 32, vertices on spline, and adaptive contrast. These works really well for face swap. Now, if you're having some issues, definitely go to uniform and try out uniform. Uniform works. I would try uniform for things like, let's say, a t-shirt. You want to track the t-shirt and put a logo or a design on a t-shirt or a flag, that's when I would use uniform. But like I mentioned, for face swaps, automatic, 32, vertices and spline, adaptive contrast works well. And make sure that you have warp spline selected. And smoothness is how much flexibility or how much you want it to not to bend or how rigid. So a low value, a value of 0 means it's really flexible, like a flag. A higher value, closer to 100, is very rigid. You can let Mocha interpolate automatically by hitting auto, but for this case, we'll leave it right in the middle, right at 50. And we're ready to track. So what we'll do is, since we're at the beginning, let's just track forward. Okay, let's check it out. Let's just scrub through. And it looks pretty good. You can see that it's mapping the movement of the chin and the cheeks pretty well. There's a little movement up here, and there's not a lot of detail. It's right in the highlight section. You can see these two are moving, but that should be okay. You also have the option to delete any of these points. And if you do want to delete it, like I said, it's okay because we won't be using this section up here. But if you do want to delete, what you do is you go to this button. It'll enable this button where you can now edit the points. We can select this point, hit delete, and let's check it out. And if you want maybe this button, this point, hit delete. But let's undo and let's leave it. I think this should be fine. Now, we need to select a reference frame, and the reference frame will be the frame where we'll do the compositing. So let's go and select a neutral pose. We can select the beginning, but just to show you, we can select, for example, right here, 127.15. Now, to set the reference frame, there are two methods here in Mocha. Number one is you can go to the surface tool. Let's hide the mesh. Let's hide this. Let's deselect this, and it's not working. There you go. So we'll hide the mesh, and what we can do is we can apply this surface tool to the edges by clicking on the align to surface tool. That's one method. The other method is by going to the stabilize, and here in the frame list, just hit the plus, and now 127.15 is our reference frame. Now for warp mapping, let's go to mesh warp. We need to select it. Don't worry about this. We'll select it inside the plugin in After Effects, and we can switch it to high. But these options, we can set it also inside the plugin. We're ready to close Mocha. We need to save it. And it's all there. The tracking data is in there, but we'll use it in a second. What we'll do right now is let's go to the footage. Obviously, you need to match the perspective. You need to time it out. And this is something that I did. I timed it out, and I know it's around here at 30 seconds in. And what I'll do is I'll trim this layer, move it over, and I'll hit LL so I can see the waveform. And what I'll do is let's undo. There you go. Let me make sure that I only have one layer selected. And let me move this, and I can actually, we can bump up the volume. Let's see, we can bump up the volume to 10 so we can see more of the waveform. And let's just line it up. Perfect. So that looks pretty good. And remember that 127.15 is our reference frame. So let's add a marker, label it ref for reference, and let's check it out. Let's see if it's synced up.
Name's Bond. James Bond.
That looks pretty good. Okay, let's create a copy of the bonded layer, Control D or Command D, and let's call it ref for reference. We'll select these two layers, the top layer and the reference, right click, pre-compose, move all attributes, and let's call it face swap. And let's go into face swap. Let's jump inside. And we need to drag this one more. Now, this shot of me, even though I'm trying to stay still, I move it a little bit. So I need to stabilize my head. And you can use a tracker inside of After Effects, but since we have Mocha Pro has that feature as well. So let's jump into Mocha Pro again, but this time for the shot of my performance. And let's move the CTI to the very beginning. And since I'm not moving my head in perspective, it's just staying still, I'm going to cheat it and fool the algorithm into thinking that this is one plane. So in the track, let's track the top 3, deselect shear, and let's go ahead and track forward. Once it's done, let's close it. Let's save it. Let's go to Mocha Pro right here, the plugin, module renders, select stabilize and select render. I'm going to solo this layer and I'm going to click on the transparency grid. And I think you can see as I move that, you can see that it's shifting and compensating for that small drift. And it should have locked right to my head. So this clip is stabilized. And now what we need to do, let's unsolo. Let's pre-compose, select the layer, pre-compose, and let's move all attributes. And let's call it stabilize. And we can trim this layer. Now what we'll do is let's go to the pen tool and let's draw a mask like this to show the face. And Alt Control Home to move the anchor point right in the center. The letter V for victory to move it. S for scale. Scale it down to 78. And let's move it. W for the rotation tool. And what we can do is T for opacity to bring down the opacity. We might need to move this down. Maybe rotate a little bit more. And you can see that I wasn't looking at the right spot, but still we should be able to make it work. Now this is important. The more you get the perspective right when you're shooting this, the better obviously it'll look. We can tweak the mask MM to reveal the mask and the properties, and let's feather this to about 35. And we're doing this in the reference frame. Remember, 127.15 is a reference frame. We're not doing it here or anywhere else, but it's right at the reference frame. And let's hide it. Let's bring it. I might want to move this a little bit more. Okay, now we need to color correct the face so it'll match the face of Bond. And to do that, select the layer, effect, go to color correction, and then levels. And we'll switch it to the red channel, and here in the levels, red channel. And what we want to do is match the highlights. So let's move the slider so it'll match the highlights of Bond, and we'll do the shadows as well. So that looks pretty good. Let's do the same thing for the green channel. Let's match the highlights and then the shadows. Let's go to the blue channel and do the same thing. Let's move the slider for the highlights. And let's do the shadows. Once we're done, switch back to RGB. And you can see that we need to put a little bit more red. So let's move the red. And we can go to RGB, give it a little bit more contrast. And it's looking a lot better. We can tweak it further, but from here to here, it's looking pretty good. Like I said, this is a fine tuning stage where you can just spend more time and just really fine tune. If you need to adjust exposure, go to color correction, exposure, and we can bring up the exposure a little bit, or we can drop it down. For example, -0.3, drop down the exposure. and we want to blur it as well. Give it a little blur. Since the bond clip is a little soft, go to blur, Gaussian blur, and give it a value of about 2 pixels. And you can see that I need to bring this closer to the edge. And we can tweak this more. Let's undo. Let's keep it here. This is good for now. Definitely, this is a stage for you to tweak. You can see that the mask feather right here, you can see a little bit of the edge of my face. And what we can do is go back to the mask feather. We can decrease the value, maybe 25, bring it in a little closer. And you can still see it. Maybe a little bit less, maybe 20. This looks better. And let's hide the reference layer. Let's hide it. And this is what we have. Just ahead, stabilized. And now let's jump back into our main comp. And the last stage is to apply all that tracking data and distortion mesh back to the face. So to do that, let's go to the bond clip, go to Mocha Pro, select it, edit copy, and go to the face swap and let's paste it. And go to module renders. For module, select stabilize warp, the warp quality high, and finally for render, for the render box, let's check it. Now if we scrub through, you can see that it's sticking to the face. And let's disable the audio. Let's do a RAM preview and let's check it out. Let's go back and let's enable the audio and let's hear it.
Name's Bond. James Bond. The name's Bond. James Bond.